It's an enormous step forward. Anytime you see your rights coming up for debate, you wonder what's going to happen next. And this represents a major step and reminds us of the possibility of progress in this country at a time when there is so much anguish and so much expectation, and we see just how far we have to go as a country. But at a personal level, it was 11 years ago this summer that I took an oath in a commission and joined the military in a job that I could have lost if my chain of command learned that I was gay. In other words, firing me wasn't just permitted, it was the official policy. And the other job that meant so much to me over the course of the last decade, serving as mayor of my hometown, I often wondered if I would lose that job as a consequence of coming out. In the end, I didn't. But so many Americans have faced employment discrimination and other forms of discrimination because of who they are, because of whom they love. And this makes clear that a plain, common sense, conservative even, reading of the Civil Rights Act just doesn't allow for that. Now, that doesn't mean that the struggle is over, but it is a big, big step. Uh, the ban on transgender service members serves no military purpose. It simply attacks some Americans for the benefit of the president's political agenda. And I will tell you, as somebody who served, whether somebody is going to make a good service member or a good officer has to do with their military bearing. It has to do with their training. It has to do with their commitment. It has absolutely nothing to do with sexual orientation or gender identity. We're thinking about family, and as we do that, we know that we can't count on being treated equally by various agencies and organizations. Just this very month, the Trump administration filed a brief in court to try to make sure that religious excuses for discrimination could continue. Look, this is a time when we need to ask ourselves as a country what it means to believe and act on LGBTQ equality. And there's such a long way to go when it comes to access to adoption. And again, a lot of excuses have been made suggesting that there's some rationale behind this that have been shot down over the years. But look, this is one of many areas where there's a long way to go. There continues to be an epidemic of violence against Black trans women. There continues to be conversion therapy, which I think shouldn't even be called therapy because it harms children. We clearly have a long way to go. And yet, I think this affirms what many Americans already thought of as common sense. As a matter of fact, one of the challenges in getting to equality was that a lot of Americans would have assumed that you can't be fired because of who you are, who you love. But unfortunately, until when the sun came up yesterday, that wasn't yet true. What we're learning is that none of those steps are enough. I was humbled repeatedly before these challenges as mayor. Today is also a very painful anniversary here in our city because it was 1 year ago that Eric Logan, a Black man, was shot and killed by a white police officer. And it unleashed a wave of anguish and calls for reform and a number of steps here in the city. But look, the reality is even departments that have been held up as model departments have gone on to see horrific police violence. And so I think what we have learned is that it's got to be this and much more. Of course, we should be doing steps like body cameras and greater police accountability and ensuring that there's not immunity when an officer does the wrong thing and more diverse police departments. Of course, we should be doing that. But this is bigger than that. This is about culture. And it's even bigger than policing. Until Black Americans have the full economic, political, and social empowerment and equality, that means that you are an equally empowered citizen. There will continue to be these instances and expressions on a daily basis in the life of Black Americans, from small things all the way to these horrific cases of violence. And this is a time when white Americans, especially white Americans with good intentions who get up in the morning believing ourselves to be anti-racist, to ask what that actually requires of us, what it actually means. And that's where I think there's a lot of hope in this moment, in the diversity of those who are responding to things that so many Black voices say that they have been screaming at the top of their lungs for years or for decades. I'm going to be careful about giving advice to a man who knows more about the vice presidency than probably anyone alive. But what I do know is that there is a gap in leadership and representation in government as well as in the private sector. And there are so many extraordinary women of color in our party, in our country, who can and are right now providing extraordinary leadership.